welcome to the Prince Softcover. In today's episode, we have with us Esha Chhabra. Esha is the author of Working to Restore How We Do Business in the Regenerative Era. So thank you for joining us, Esha.
Thank you for having me.
So just to get started, so what I found truly remarkable about your book is the expanse of it, in the sense it traverses multiple countries, multiple continents. So, I mean, how did you go about writing it? Like, what was the process like?
So I have been covering this space for over 10 years now, and that has really given me a great background because I've had the opportunity to go and meet so many entrepreneurs, travel to so many of these places. And so when I set out to do this book, I was really having this conversation with the publishers as to like, what does this space need? And a lot of the books on social entrepreneurship and mission-driven companies had been written from founders themselves or been written from people like in a really academic kind of think tank space. So they were very theoretical books. There wasn't really anything journalistic in this nature, where it was just about the stories and these case studies of these entrepreneurs that was very easy to read and accessible for a lot of readers who are interested in these topics. They don't have to be living and breathing, sustainability. So for me, that was the framework of the book. And then I thought about the UN Sustainable Development Goals as kind of like the background of the major themes that we wanted to hit. But then it was also trying to break it down into products and things that we all engage with on a regular basis so that it is, again, relatable. So that's why there's a lot of food, there's a lot of fashion, there's health, there's travel. These are all things that, we interact with every single day in our lives. And yes, to make it a global book, because to show that this movement is not specific to a geography. I'm based in the US, but I'm originally from India. And I had really started my reporting career doing a lot of reporting in India. And India and East Africa were like the hub of all of social entrepreneurship. That's where you were seeing so many social entrepreneurs come out in, 2013, 2014, that time. But that movement has expanded, it's really everywhere. So that's why you find companies in the book that are from all the major continents of the world.
Yeah. So the other thing I want to speak to you about, so greenwashing, at least in my mind, is one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way of people realizing like the repercussions of climate change. It's everywhere. All companies do it, like most companies do it. So, I mean, how did you sort of like peel back the layers and find companies that were genuinely sustainable, that genuinely had like ethical business practices?
I mean, that's the really hard part, right? And so that
Yeah,
comes from
exactly.
just years of like having talked to companies and getting to understand that the ones that really walk the talk, most of the companies in the book, none of the companies in the book are corporates. So that was one thing that kind of helps, stay away from that problem. Not to say that not all corporates are bad or that they're not doing it. Many are trying, but that is one big challenge because they're just operating in a very different business model. These are more medium-sized companies. They've been around for 7 to 10 years. They've shown that their model works. Often the founders are still the CEOs, so that value and that mission is still very much so there. But yeah, really digging into their supply chains, asking questions, being very scrutinizing, and trying my best to understand, who are the people that are really building businesses to solve a problem and not just a profit in some way. But yes, the G word, as I like to call it, greenwashing, it's everywhere these days. And it is hard for consumers to kind of be able to tell the difference between what is just savvy marketing and what is actually going on in companies.
Yeah. And so, I mean, sustainability, as you write it, as these businesses practice it, is not just about having like a low emission business. It's about like inclusivity and it's about equity, and it's very much connected to the people. So why was this something that was important for you to put forth, this sort of people-centric approach to sustainability?
Because I think it's missing in the dialogue. We focus so much on the environmental, which is, very important, obviously. But at the same time, it's the people that make a lot of that possible, right? If you don't support the farmers or the supply chains that are giving you these crops, they're not going to look after the soil. They're not going to look after the earth in that way. So the two are intrinsically connected. The other thing I would say is also actually like, as I was talking to people and these entrepreneurs, they were all saying, we're fed up with the word towards sustainability. Because think about it for a second. What are we sustaining? You know, a broken system. We need to do something different. So many were returning to traceability, transparency, other words. And in 2018, when I started writing this, regenerative was just beginning to come into the lexicon. And it was mostly associated with agriculture. But then I thought about it, and if you look up the word regenerate, it really means to like bring life into something. It means to like just give it that nutrition, that kind of love and support that it needs, and restore, which is to restore that kind of imbalance that we've created. So those were the two words that then we really played with, the publishers and I. And as time has gone on, now we're hearing about regenerative business. So these are companies that are thinking about every aspect of the company. So like you said, people are an important part of it. Who you employ, how you look after them, what you pay them. It's a big part of the story that unfortunately sometimes gets glossed over. And then the last thing I would add is, like, during the pandemic, at least here in the US, it's been such a talking point. I mean, everybody is kind of rethinking what they do every single day for 8 to 10 hours. Like, I want my work to have purpose. And especially Gen Z is very passionate about these issues. So I think the social aspect of it is just as critical as the environmental aspect.
And I mean, so in your book, you talk about so many different businesses operating in such diverse areas. I mean, like, there's like that packaging business, there's leather, there's coffee, there's just everything in it. So I mean, it makes you feel very hopeful, right? It makes you feel like, there is such good work happening out there. So, I mean, after you wrote this book, do you feel like there is enough to be hopeful about? Like, do you feel optimistic about like how we're operating in the business realm?
I think so. I mean, we have to have optimism. It's also come from years of being in the media and kind of understanding also how the media works. The media loves a scandal. They love controversy, and so that's what gets a lot of the attention. But yes, there's loads of people out there doing work every single day that's not scandalous, that's not controversial, right? But when I started my career, I was very kindly mentored by a gentleman by the name of David Bornstein in the US. And he was writing for the New York Times this column called Fixes. And he went on to create an organization called the Solutions Journalism Network. And it was this idea of writing about solutions. Like, we all know there's problems, whether you're living in India or the US, there's problems everywhere. But there are people out there that are working on these solutions. So let's highlight their stories. Let's be critical, ask good questions as to whether or not everything that they're doing is actually productive. But just this solutions lens is so needed. And also, as I was engaging with people, I mean, people would tell me, like, I've stopped watching the news, I've stopped reading the newspaper, because it's just so much doom and gloom. And I think people are hungry for stories of just something that is more practical optimism, that yes, we understand that there are social and climate issues on the horizon in every industry practically. But there are people that are genuinely trying to solve these problems. And the idea is that you read this book, and it's not necessarily that you need to replicate these companies, but just take away something from it. If you're working in a larger organization, what can you do within your department? If you're a young person just starting out your career, maybe it gives you inspiration of what you want to do with your career. So yeah, I mean, I am very optimistic. I get to spend a lot of time interacting with entrepreneurs and understanding that it's also very hard what they're doing. Economics still matter. As much as you want to be like mission driven and really think about your impact and all of that, that's great. But at the end of the day, it's a business. Like, you have to make it financially profitable. So also there's a lot of understanding there that this is not an easy path.
Yeah. So the other thing I really appreciated about the book was the structure of it. So, I mean, for our viewers, the book takes on 9 areas and looks into businesses in 9 areas, like kind of, again, a diversity of areas. Like, we have health, we have supply chain. So within these 9 sectors, I mean, because even these 9 sectors, it's not exhaustive in that sense. So how did you sort of zero in on these 9 areas?
Yeah, I mean, this book could have been much longer. It was actually much longer when we started to put it together. because
Okay,
there were
okay.
so many companies to
Yeah.
include. But these were just kind of one, I made a list of the companies,
Yeah.
roughly speaking, in terms of the categories that they would fall under, and then also tried to even fine tune that. So, I mean, like, for example, there's two chapters on workforce, one that's in supply chains and
Yeah.
one that's workforce that's closer to you in your own workplace. So that's how we ended up dividing
Yeah.
that. But I think it really does go back to this idea of just like, what are some common industries that we are interacting with? Because a lot of consumers are asking, like, we're interested, but how do we get involved? What do we support? What do we do? How do we educate ourselves? And consumers don't have time to do the kind of, extensive journalistic work that you and I might do.
Yeah.
So it's really like making it as easy for them to digest as well.
Yeah. So in the introduction of the book, you say that, and I think in the epilogue as well, you say that there's no ideal solution at the end, and at the end of the day, we do live in a society dominated by capitalism. So then, I mean, in order to find environmental solutions, do you feel like we have to look through the lens of business, through corporations?
I mean, it's a big question, right? So it's fundamentally capitalism that we're all
Yeah.
realizing is really
Yeah.
pushing us down this road. How do we change
Yeah.
capitalism, right? For the corporates to change it, it's much harder because they are operating where they have a lot of shareholders, they have quarterly projections, they have to meet certain targets, and they're also on this like road of just scale and growth
Yeah.
all the time. That's very difficult. What a lot of these companies are doing, and what one entrepreneur kind of said to me that I thought was really thought-provoking, is like asking yourself, how much is enough? This question of like how much is enough can answer so many things on a personal level, like what your consumption is, but also for a business to say, like, I don't need to be an international brand. I don't even need to be a national brand. I just need to get to a certain scale that I can support X number of employees, have that much cash flow. And I'm okay with that. I'm content with that. Because at that level, you're able to kind of manage the business side of it with the values side of it, perhaps a little bit more easily without having to compromise on your values. I think it's this question of scale that gets people into a lot of trouble, right? Because when you're just trying to grow and grow rapidly, then your focus is really profit. Your focus is really numbers. And you may have to cut corners, and I think it is harder. So yeah, that's the question that I walked away with, and I think about that now a lot. It's like this question of enough. How much is enough for you as an entrepreneur, as an individual? When you look at food, how much is enough, in terms of consumption and the kind of waste that we have, at least here we hear about in the US. In fashion, like that's the fundamental problem, right? It's not like that there's not enough ethical business out there in fashion, but it's also just like people consuming so much fashion on a daily basis and buying so many outfits. Can we get companies to get off of that runway of like, we need to churn out new styles every season? So these are the kind of questions that I think these companies pose, and a lot of people are very interested in challenging the status quo. So I mean, corporations are also picking up on this. They're waking up to this.
So, I mean, so taking this forward, I mean, I found your chapter on tourism to be quite interesting because I mean, you basically look at two things, right? This having a smaller footprint and slow traveling. And this also sort of shifts the onus onto the consumer as well, right? So, I mean, do you feel, and again, like the way you're speaking about like ethical businesses, ethical fashion businesses, did you find that are consumers ready to sort of make this shift as well?
I think so. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. And I'm seeing that there's more and more interest in quality over quantity. I feel like we live in an age, right, where we're just being bombarded by information, so much technology, the pace of life is so fast. So I do think that people are genuinely looking for things that are more meaningful. That's why, like, things that are handmade, things that have a story behind them. They're really resonating with people. In the travel chapter, though, I will say in the introduction, I talk about how the airline industry really needs to
Yeah.
pivot. And that would make a
Yeah.
massive difference if we had better fuel options.
Yeah.
And they're working on that. And that's a longer project.
Yeah.
But the three companies that are profiled in the travel chapter actually do also talk about what the changes the hospitality industry is doing. So, like, for
Yeah.
example, that one hotel that's in
Yeah.
Bournemouth in England, that's a very like middle tier hotel. It's not crazy expensive
Yeah.
and it's very affordable. And they've been able to incorporate all these things into their structure and their infrastructure and their, operations that makes them a little bit more eco-conscious. That's also part of the responsibility of the hospitality industry, for sure. I don't think it's 100% on consumers. And then the second example is the one in Norway
Yeah.
of this rather family-run operation, but it's in a very interesting ecosystem, which is visited by hordes of tourists every year, and, dozens of cruises coming through. So that is also, again, in the same price point as its competitors. But they're saying, like, why don't you just come, and instead of doing a cruise where you're going from one, like fjord to the next,
Yeah.
come stay in this one fjord for a few extra days and do it at a slower pace. And the last example is perhaps a little controversial because it is luxury, but
Yeah.
it does, really ask this question of, like, if people have that kind of disposable income, have the
Yeah.
desire to go do an incredible safari in Africa, how that can support conservation, and the work that
Yeah.
that particular safari company is doing, and there are others like them as well. So I tried to give three different also price
Yeah.
points,
Of
three different
course. Yeah.
examples in that way so that it's accessible for everyone, because I know not everybody can do the high-end luxury
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Isha. And I have a copy of the book as well.
Amazing.
So this is the book, and congratulations, Isha. I mean, hope it does really well in India as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you.